My name is Joycelyn Buffon. I'm a local parent and I work with young people across Hackney as part of my organisation Rise 365. Thank you very much to everyone for attending the event this evening, which has been convened by Councillor Antoinette Bramble, the Deputy Mayor and Cabinet Member for Education, Young People, Children and Social Care. The event this evening is a chance for our panel to update you on City and Hackney Safeguarding Children's Partnership report, the actions we have taken internally and across schools since the last child key briefing to parents in July 2022, and to answer the questions you have submitted to our panel this evening. Our panel this evening is Councillor Antoinette Bramble, Deputy Mayor, Cabinet Member for Education, Young People and Children's Social Care, Jim Gamble, Independent Chair, City of London and Hackney Safeguarding Children's Partnership, and Paul Senior, Director of Education. In a moment, we'll hear a few words from Councillor Antoinette Bramble, but I'd like to remind you of some ground rules for the evening. Please be reminded that we do have a court injunction in place that prevents us from naming the school to ensure that the identity of Child Q is protected. I'd like to remind you not to reference this during the event. We have got officers monitoring the chat to ensure that this doesn't happen. Thank you to all the questions that have been submitted so far. The panel will be answering those questions later on, but you can also continue to enter your questions for us, for the panel to answer via the chat. At this time, can I ask Councillor Bramble to please address us?
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for again coming to be the convener for this evening. I want to thank all of you for your time that you've taken out. I know that coming towards the beginning of the summer holidays is a busy time for parents and carers, so really value your time and want to thank the officers that are here as well. And I suppose the main reason, and Jim, of course, that you'll hear from, I suppose the main reason why I wanted us to have this meeting is to give you a chance as parents to hear back from us about what has been going on. But moreover, I was acutely aware of Jim Gamble, the Independent Chair, knowing that his safeguarding report was going to be released and having that opportunity to come back and talk to us and thinking about what does that look like in light of Child Q, what's happened in our response. So the updated report was very detailed and spoke about many things to consider and also some points for us to reflect on as a local authority, and we are working through what that looks like for us. I think for me, you know, the media may have moved on, interest has moved on, but for us in Hackney, this is quite live to us, and hence us being here now. But for me as lead member, it's not just about giving you the opportunity to question us and hopefully give you some reassurance. It's about how we move not beyond, but move forward in the context of what's happened in Child Q. Because actually my concern is if we only talk about Child Q, and she's important and her family are important, and the support that we continue to give her as a local authority continues to be important, of course. But for me, it's important that she and her family have the time to heal, and how we talk about the broader systemic drivers of racism, institutional racism, because actually what happened to Child Q, while it's absolutely abhorrent and unacceptable, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because of the broader issues around systemic racism within society. It's about the broader experience of Black and local minority children. And my concern is if we don't begin as an organisation to talk about those issues, we will face with maybe not another issue with what's happened with Child Q in a school, but it's around stop and search on the streets. It's around a young person in another organisation. So it's how we take a broader approach around systemic challenges that happen to Black and global majority children that I think is important. It's about how we go beyond looking about equality for our Black and global majority residents and how we expose injustice and hold accountable all the organisations and how we work together and unrooting and unmasking, as I said, systemic racism. This isn't about calling any individual racist. It's about knowing that those systemic drivers within society have to be unpicked, have to be challenged, have to be talked about. And as a local authority, we are on the journey of, as an organisation, and you know, when I was first elected alongside the mayor back in 2022, which seems a long time ago, myself and many members from cabinet, including the Equalities League, began our elected office on a 4-day anti-racist programme that was led by Deborah Robinson, just talking about what that looks like, making sure we have the support there for staff, but also talking about, in the context of our school, what does that mean for our schools, and what does that mean for our relationship with the police. So it's really important that we carry on this work, that we are challenging, reflective, working with our partners, questioning our partners, staying curious, but ultimately that we don't leave you, parents and carers, outside of that, that you feel that you are absolutely intrinsic in part of that. And that's why it's really important that we have Jocelyn here this evening, someone that's really active in the community and has a trusted ear and a trusted space from the community to show that broader working in partnership with you, because actually, you know, you as parents and carers may go to Jocelyn and other community groups before you come to us, and that is something that I'm acutely aware of. I'm going to pause there, Chair, because I'm just conscious that maybe possibly I've gone under time over time, right. But it's just thank you really for the importance of tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to what you said. Actually, it has been very comforting and reassuring for the young people that I work with and the parents and stuff that you have been very open to conversations and you've been very honest in those conversations. And that's also for you, Jim. You know, the young people met with you, they were able to speak to you about their experiences and, you know, discuss, you know, what they felt and, you know, what they didn't want to be going through anymore. And you was very open to that. So I do thank you all for the work that has been put in so far. So at this time, Jim, if you can update us on your findings, please.
Hello. So when we say really update on findings, my update report was the final piece of work that I was doing, updating on the initial child Q report. So the work that was carried out and was published in over 100 pages in June was an assessment of where we were. It made, you know, 8 further, it reviewed the 8 findings, the 14 initial recommendations, and in fact added 13 additional recommendations in the aftermath of this. A couple of things I'd want to say. When we talked to the young people, what I found was many of them had been informed, not by the Child Q report itself, that we published back in March 2022, but by what they heard on social media, the sound bites that they'd picked up in the media. So they weren't particularly well informed about exactly what had happened. And when I spoke to them, they said, look, you know, if we could have had a video or a particular briefing for us, it would have been much, much more helpful and easier for us to engage with. So about 10 days ago, we published a video. It's 14 minutes long. It provides an overview of the update, what we have found so far, what we believe still needs to be done. And it can be broken into 4 parts. You can look at the recap on the Child Q case in just under 3 minutes. You can look at the update as it relates to the actions of what has been done and what is yet to be done in part 2, which is about 6 minutes. You can then look at the additional recommendations, which are explained in some detail in a further couple of minutes, and then of course the conclusion. So you can do it all in 14 minutes, or you can do it in, and the idea of that was to make it more accessible for young people. And I would ask anyone that hasn't seen the video or shared it with their children or shared it across their school or youth club, to do so, because I think the power of the report came from the voice of children. What I would say is that some people in the aftermath of the report, rather than simply embrace it, tried to diminish it to a degree by saying, well, it's not wholly representative. It was only 100 children. And what I would say to you as advocates of children is, if anyone says that to you, not only was it 100 children, it was 100 Black children from across this borough who are representative of the community that Child Q came from. It was 100 children who were spoken to in spaces and places where they felt safe enough to share their views with us in an unvarnished way. But they were views that didn't stand alone, because of the many parents and carers that we spoke to, right through the organizations, the grassroots organizations, into the staff themselves who work across the borough. What the children told us was reflected, evidenced, and reinforced by all of those other views. So I don't think we should tolerate any dilution of the message in that report. The key is what next. I welcome the fact that the council recognised what was done and accepted the recommendations in the report. What has to happen now is that we each have to play our part in pressing the council, the police, children's social care, Hackney Education, and others with regards to the recommendations to keep the pressure on. Because as the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Bramble, has already said, the media has lost its appetite for it now. The sensation is gone. And this is where the hard work begins. So we need to be pressing Council, and I know Councillor Bramble and Philip Glanville, the Mayor, absolutely committed to doing what we have recommended within the report. And that's a strength. When we move across schools, we've got to make sure that those involved in delivering education to our children and young people are listening and they're responding. Because today, I was in Hackney earlier and I met with the family of Child C, not Child Q, Child C, to Sean Aird's mum and dad. And I'd promised some time ago that we would take their perspective of what happened to their child who was stabbed to death, and that we would create a learning product for professionals around that. And when I sat with them today and went through the case with them and captured their perceptions about how they were engaged, about what happened to Sean through his journey into education, his exclusion from one school, his placement in an alternative provision, and how that placement was almost an incubator for things to go wrong, because he was placed in an environment where there were other children with extremely complex needs, with gang association and gang affiliation, and that influence in that environment at that time for him was unhealthy. And in what they told me as they related his story, what was really clear to me were early echoes of what was to come with Child Q, the adultification of young Black children when engaged by the police. So we need to recognise, as Councillor Bramble has said, that this isn't just about this case. This is about a broader issue and a deeper problem where young Black children across the borough have difficulties engaging in school. In some schools, some of the schools provide a fabulous environment and great education. But even in those environments, people can slip. So it's about demanding what's best for our children. And I think the recommendations that we have provided in the report are key. Can we be sure that our children feel safe and respected in school? And can we engage with schools to make sure that the sanctions they apply are consistent and fair? When it comes to the police are telling me that they're considering the recommendations. I have a meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. with the Home Office and the police powers team to talk about strip searching, the law, and what needs to be changed and what must be changed as we move forward. So again, whilst there's some optimism, we have a borough commander who definitely appears to be listening. But what we need central authority and command to support that. And finally, I think, you know, the report speaks for itself, and I'm happy to answer any questions. The problem for me is the report cannot be the end of the process. It has to be the beginning of the next stage of the work that the borough does, that Hackney Education do, that the police use as a mechanism to change, and that schools reflect upon to see how they can further improve the environment so that we educate and empower our children in a way that makes them, you know, able to thrive in Hackney. So I'll not say any more than that, because the video and the report speak for themselves, but I am here to answer any questions when they arise.
Thank you for that, Jim. I was just wondering, for those that have joined us that may not have seen or read the report, are you able just to maybe mention a few of the recommendations?
Well, I would be here all night to go through the recommendations. What I would say is this is part of the problem. People need to actually take the time to read the recommendations in context. So we're saying, for example, around policing, the recommendation is that the Metropolitan Police Commissioner should acknowledge institutional racism. He should be clear that it exists and that it has an influence. Within those recommendations, I have explained that institutional racism doesn't mean that every officer is a racist, but institutional racism recognizes that over years, procedures and practices have evolved that have become normalized, and that they're not normal and should never be treated as normal. So the system itself needs to be changed so that officers are trained, officers engage, and only those procedures and policies that are equitable are applied. So we've said, recognize it for what it is, because people want to hear it. That's one recommendation. With regards to the police, we've said that there needs to be a look at the breadth, depth, and scale of the Metropolitan Police. It is so broad and so wide that in different parts of London, communities will seek different types of policing. So we have said in our recommendation that from the Metropolitan Police perspective, they should review how borough commanders are appointed, and there should be a local element to that appointment so that locally elected people that are community elect, have a say and a sway in which commander is going to be our borough commander, who is going to be responsible, and more importantly, provide clear lines of accountability. We've made a recommendation that the work being done by the Mayor of London around scrutiny of policing at a local level involves more local people, and that we can see action, not just fine words, but action and consequence when things don't go right and when things go wrong. And when it comes to schools, we've said that we need to be reassured that all of our schools are behaving in a way that is appropriate for our children. And we've seen lots of evidence that many of the schools are doing great things. We've seen evidence of Black and global majority parents groups, of listening to children and adapting. But what we want is, we want to involve young people in the inspection work that I carry out as scrutineer. We want to carry out a survey across schools where we can ask how respected, how safe children feel within their school environment, so that we can audit that on a yearly basis, so we can see the proportion of children who are thriving, and we can see the number of children who are not, and then ask questions about that. We've also made a recommendation about consistency and fairness. So when I spoke to children, you know, in the different groups, Quest and Badu and others who made young people available to me, they talked about different approaches in different schools to the application of search. So we made a recommendation to the DFE to further clarify the need for proper auditing and recording of searching, to balance justification and proportionality. But actually, we've gone beyond that and said, look, it must be possible for local head teachers to come together and agree, because in one school in Hackney, I will be searched because someone thinks I have my phone on me. Another school in Hackney, I can have my phone in my bag as long as I don't take it out in class and have it outside the school. So it's about consistency and fairness. So it cannot be too difficult for schools to come together and say, here is what you're expected. You're not expected to have knives, you're not expected to have weapons, we get that. There is a case that actually you shouldn't have vapes in because we know that's affecting our children's health. You know, the issue of phones is a really good example, and in some schools, money. There's a debate to be had about whether that makes sense, whether a child should be contactable from when they leave the school gates until they get home. I personally think they should be. But it's all about balance, and it's about collective agreement. So we've made recommendations in that regard, and they're not going to be easy because schools, you know, are separate entities in many cases. They have their own leadership, and they would say, look, you've got the ability to choose. If you don't like our rules, go somewhere else. But to me, that's not good enough. The rules need to be consistent and fair. We recognize that this isn't just about the obvious things around stop and search and MTIP strip searches or searching in school or the attitude of police officers to children. It's about broader disproportionality. It's about being over-policed and underprotected. So we've said this ranges from housing to health, you know, the proportionality of policing and access and support in education. And that's why we made the recommendation that the Mayor and the Cabinet should consider a mechanism that allows for comprehensive and complete strategic oversight of how they're going to move this active anti-racism forward in all of those areas, housing, health, education, policing, and elsewhere, so that it's not something that falls behind, because that's what's happened before. We're all driven by shock when something happens, and we all, you know, protest for days. But then the risk is that we fall back into the trap of thinking, well, you know, we've had the report, we've ticked that box. So we're seeking for the council in the recommendation to create a mechanism and potentially appoint an individual who this isn't an add-on. This is a fundamental focus. It's not a priority for that person. It is the priority. And so that gives you a flavor of the direction of travel and the thrust of the recommendations, because what's next is what is critically important. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Jim, for explaining that. Really appreciate that. And for everybody, the link is in the chat. As Jim said, it would be really good if everybody could take the time out and read the report and really understand it for yourselves. So at this time, Paul will now update us on actions Hackney Education has taken since the Child Q session in July 2022.
And Jocelyn, thank you very much. Following on from the comments of Jim, as the chair of the City and Hackney Safeguarding Children's Partnership, and Deputy Mayor Bramble, just to give an overview of what's happened in the education space, but also I'll share something with regards to children's social care and other parts of the system as well. Whilst there's been a lot of activity and a lot of engagement, I'm going to share some of the edited highlights with those who are joining us for this webinar. So I suppose looking back to the summer last year, a number of young people from secondary schools in the Young Hackney Youth Organisation attended workshops at the Tomlinson Centre, which involved young people and the police. Ideas, it's very much an idea about bringing people together, cross-referencing on what's working in this space, what's not, and very much a lot of folk in listening mode. Say the schools police officers who work in local schools are an important part of that conversation. And at this dialogue, it was very much welcomed and recognised that whilst the Metropolitan Police have if you like, a pan-London protocol for the work of state schools police officers, there was a recognition by local police in working with Hackney Education that there was the need for a Hackney addendum in response to Hackney's unique specific circumstances. So we've seen that Hackney addendum, the State Schools Police operation, be shaped and shared recently and shared with parents at several events at local schools as well, which I know a number of parents, some of whom may well be in on this call tonight, have attended to voice their views, to ensure their views have helped shape and design that as well. So that was an important piece of work, but recognition that even though London, first three London local authorities, the Met Police protocol that covers all of them, but there was a need for a Hackney addendum to look at the learning from what's happened recently, but also to look at the Hackney specific context. So I suppose that was a positive development. During the autumn term, led by Deborah Robinson, who's my systems lead for inclusion, who's progressing the work of the inclusion charter as well. We organised a number of symposiums at local schools with a focus on anti-racism and really rich engagement, really rich input from parents and from carers and professionals in schools and settings, but also we were able to invite professionals from other neighbouring authorities. I can remember a head teacher from Harrogate being able to come along and share his experience of the system as well, just to share what works in this space. So lots of good learning coming out of those symposiums, using local secondary schools such as Mossbourne and the City Academy in Hopperton, who very much stepped up and made sure that they wanted their schools actually to be part of this conversation as well. So really helpful sessions. As I mentioned earlier, the work of the inclusion charter. So this is about a charter that all of our local schools, seeking to get them to all sign up to this, to be part of this inclusion ethos, recognise that core standard and inclusion locally, where we've got a real focus on inclusion, and there's a byproduct of that, the anti-racism agenda, and progressing our anti-racism agenda and themes. That's an important part as well. So we're nearing conclusion on that, actually, and we're hoping early in the autumn term we'll be having a version that will be near ready for circulation with partners, with stakeholders, with providers, including our parents and carers, as well as young people as well. So in addition to the programme of work that Jim has set out that he undertook in terms of engaging young people to capture the voice of young people as part of this programme, Deborah, I mentioned Deborah Robinson as our systems lead in this space, with Marissa Charles, who's the chair of the Hackney Schools Group Board, which was an independent board convened by Deputy Mayor Bramble a number of years ago to be that arm's length organisation from Hackney Education, to provide that critical friend, that challenge, that support, because Councillor Bramble was very keen to have that outside body to be able to hold to account what goes on in the system. So Deborah and Marissa, as the chair of the Hackney Schools Group Board, were able to visit a number of schools, convene circle times, have a number of key conversations as well with young people to talk about their experience of the education system as well. So some really helpful sessions to do, because this is something that Hackney majors on really well in terms of capturing the voice of the young people to help shape and design and inform our systems and our processes. So some really helpful dialogue. And I know that Deborah and I know that Marissa will be continuing that conversation with a number of our schools going into the autumn year as well. In terms of recent events, Deborah convened with the support of local head teachers and partners a number of well-recognised speakers, a number of recent head teacher listening events as well, which we had such as Orleen Badu, an education consultant. During the session, which she called for school leaders to consider the acknowledgement of an impact of racial trauma, which was a really powerful session, and a definition which was given, which is well recognised. Orleen went on to discuss the direct and the curious experiences of racial trauma. I mean, Orleen is well recognised in many circles in this space on a local, regional, national level. So really powerful speaking session. She asked leaders to consider the next steps to be taken for acknowledging racial trauma, and to think about how staff might respond and what support might look like going forward. So as a children education director at the council, very much pushing that STAR agenda, the importance of systemic trauma, anti-racism practice, and this is something that a number of officers from Hackney Education and the Children and Social Care Partner System as a directorate were actually invited by Ofsted to speak at the Ofsted National Directors Conference in last December in Birmingham. A party led by my colleague Diane Benjamin and a number of her team went along to talk about the work that Hackney is actually progressing in this space, really getting on the front foot, the STAR agenda, making sure that STAR becomes cross-cutting. It's a key principle for children and education as a directorate, and something that we'll be seeking to progress with the work of our schools and settings early in the new year. And when I say the new year, the new academic year. So Nadia Sika from the health part of the system has spoken recently in a number of forums about thinking spaces, which is a fully funded offer for schools as well. So again, making sure we're capturing voices to help inform what we're doing. So during April, there are a number of, I mentioned earlier, engagement events for parents and carers to come along to local schools to get a deeper understanding of the Hackney Addendum, for the Safer Schools Police Officer Programme in Hackney. And recognising whilst this is a metropolitan police initiative across all 33 London local authorities, the recognition that there's a need to adapt and adjust the Hackney model, which our colleagues at the local police, led by James Conway, the new borough commander, has been on the front foot in terms of recognising we needed to adapt and adjust the model in response to local needs. So those engagement sessions with parents were important, because I know our local colleagues at the police, working with Hackney Education, so working with my team, didn't just want to impose a new model on parents and carers and children, young people in our schools and settings. So engaging parents as well as engaging young people is an important part of that process. So in terms of support for staff, there's been a lot of activity in this space as well, in terms of providing counselling and support and staff being able to access employer programmes as well. So there's been a recognition of the traumatic impact due to the incident and the report as well, and particularly some programmes having some of those having black teenage daughters. I mean, this goes deep and it's still raw. It's still raw. So recognizing that has to be put in place a lot of support. And as Jim has said, it's got to be an ongoing process where we continue to evolve, continue to listen, and continue to adapt and adjust. So I suppose that's like some of the headlines. Some headlines from the education space. Jocelyn, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go on about some of the children's social care spaces as well and thinking spaces. Is that okay?
That's okay. I'll rein you in when it's time. Go ahead.
Okay, right. So, and in terms of, I suppose there's something here about trust and confidence as well. So that was a particular theme that has come up last year. It's come up quite frequently. So in terms of the police work, in terms of trust and confidence, there's been a programme of work where a trust and confidence group has been put together, consisting of officers, consisting of council officers, police officers, consisting of local stakeholders as well, really to come together to look at how can we bridge that gap in the trust and confidence space. So following the child queue review, the council immediately stepped in to work with the borough command unit of police to respond effectively to the report's recommendations and wider trust and confidence in policing concerns from local communities. In the period April to May 2022, community listening sessions were convened. These led to a new co-production approach for trust and confidence. In June 2022, a trust and confidence action plan co-production workshop was held through the Community Resilience Partnership with 40 community members representing 30 different community organisations. And the council and police partners has been collaborating over time to refine the plan. Over 30 meetings, so it's quite a significant time, energy, resource investment there. Over 30 meetings have been held to enable us all. All of these meetings, including community members. The action plan has priorities covering leadership, culture, practice, anti-racism, community engagement, community monitoring and training. So significant investment there. In addition to the plan, the local borough command unit, the police, the Central Metropolitan Police Service as well, and MOPAC, which is the Mayor's Office for Police and Crime, are also responding to all actions laid out in the City and Hackney Safeguarding Children's Partnership, Child Safeguarding Review, bless you, which Jim Gamble, the chair, has just touched on. From the actions completed, most notable is the improvements made in MTIP, searches of children previously known as strip searches, of which at a more senior level authorisation requirement has been tried locally, and as a result, and let's just be clear, and as a result, there have been no strip searches of children locally have been conducted since child queue. There's no searches. So clearly lessons learned, and clearly something that horribly has led to a positive impact that we've not seen a repeat of that in any way, shape or form. So in terms of, we've seen increase and evidence of increased police engagement with youth and community organisations across the borough. There can be no denying of this. I've seen the police engage in various forums with youth council, with youth groups, with a range. They clearly are. I'm seeing there's a tangible difference in the level of engagement we're seeing from the local borough police in terms of really seeking to engage with young people, to capture their voice. Community conversations with police, senior leadership team, communities Okay, and this is something, as well as the Youth Parliament, as well as Young Hackney and Rise Up East, conversations will be revisited every 6 months to evidence changes made in that period. So there's something about, you said, we've done. So having these conversations booked in to make sure that we know that every 6 months these conversations are going to be repeated allows for an accounting opportunity as well. Okay.
Thank you,
We've seen
Paul.
new scrutiny meetings as well, which has been important. There's been a QR code plus, which has been a scheme developed with Young Hackney to signpost all young people searched by the police directly to know your rights. Young Hackney and therapeutic services for a QR code provided by leaflet or phone process. I mentioned earlier the addendum to the Safer Schools Protocol, which is
Thank you,
unique
Paul.
for Hackney in relevant.
Sorry, Paul, I have to stop you there. Thank you.
Okay, I could go on. There's much more, Jocelyn. There's much
Thank you
more to
very
share
much.
here, and highlight that local area partners are taking this agenda very serious, and there's a lot to be said.
Great, thank you very much for that important information. I just know that it's very important that we have enough time to answer the questions that have been submitted previously. And can I also encourage those of you that are with us now in the webinar to please put your questions to the panel in the Q&A rather than the chat, and we will try and get around to answering those for you. So as I said, we have received some questions before the meeting. So the first one being, whoever feels best placed to answer, please do so. So can the council provide an update on 2022 secondary school exclusions, and can this be broken down in race categories?
Jocelyn, thank you. I'll talk to that one. So the 21-2022 permanent exclusion figures locally were 30, of which 15 of those young people were designated as being black. So 50% of our permanent exclusions were from black young people.
Wow, it's a very high number. Okay, another question was, how will the new measures be monitored?
To which part of the process, Chair? I was talking about exclusions.
That was literally the question. So I think it's around the recommendations in terms of how we move forward in schools with regards to what has happened with childcare.
Just before you come back in, Paul, I think it's helpful to say that we are, as a council, looking at disproportionate exclusions as a council. So not just, we absolutely want to drive down exclusions, of course, and work with schools about that, but we also are talking to schools and looking at the disproportionate amount of children from black and local majority that are being excluded, because there's no reason why children from a particular background should be excluded more highly over than any other group. So that is something that we're acutely aware of and are working with. And I know that Paul, you chaired the exclusion summit with head teachers and partners, I think maybe 3-4 weeks ago, having a real discussion around exclusions, but also looking at how we work together as a family of schools to address those exclusions and disproportionate exclusions, and understanding that it's important that from black and global majorities that children have been excluded.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Brandle. And in building on that, Josh, interest in disproportionality and really drilling down to potential, what's the narrative, what's the issue behind that disproportionality. 50% of permanent exclusions are coming from the black community, so what's behind that? What could we be doing differently? What's the drivers behind that? So that does lead to targeting with schools, that does lead to challenges to mature, robust conversations as well. The brand was just alluded to, saw input from local head teachers, saw input from local voluntary sector organisations, store input from social care, health, education, care partners, youth justice partners, a real integrated systems approach towards this. The Director of Children's Services, who unfortunately can't be with us tonight, was very keen that we put together. So when we look at exclusions, looking at a child who's excluded, the trauma behind that, and what would we be doing in an alternative joined up way? Because no head teacher ever wishes to be in a position where he or she may have to consider excluding a child. So what are we doing to prevent exclusions? But then again, the challenge to the system, how can we drive down that proportionality? And many things, and I know my head teacher colleagues are very much aware of this figure, they're aware of this concern, and they're very much themselves are making sure that their processes can stand up to the highest level of scrutiny and challenge. And very much our head teachers colleagues do engage with the local authority on this agenda. And I have regular conversations with schools where there may be their exclusions in the mix to make sure that their data stand up to scrutiny, check and challenge as well. So in terms of, yes, 30 exclusions, every child that's excluded from school is a failure of the system. So what could we have done differently? What should we have done differently between partners across crime reduction, education, social care and health? But Jocelyn, your point that 50% of our permanent exclusions being from black young people being high, absolutely. We're aware of that. We're looking at different systems and processes with a view to try and squeeze that and actually continue to improve that going forward and really drive down that proportionality. But everybody from the council leadership, from the mayor, the deputy mayor, our scrutiny committee, our head teachers, our partners right across the public sector are very much engaged on this. This is a whole system approach that's required, Jocelyn.
Thank you very much, Paul. We've had another question come in for you, and I'm going to read it as it is. It says, who will be responsible for holding the schools to account in relation to following the recommendations? If it is optional, then this will be a waste of time for all. Can we have straight and simple answers as what that would look like, please?
Do you want me to come in on this, Paul?
Yes, please, Jim. Your part of the world.
Yeah.
And I'll happily follow on with you if that's okay.
Yeah, I think from a straightforward and simple answer, the City and Hackney Safeguarding Children Board has a statutory duty to ensure that safeguarding partners and designated relevant agencies are operating within the safeguarding framework that we set and expect. We have designated all schools as relevant partners. Therefore, when we release the audits to test respect and safety in school, we will expect all schools to participate in that audit so that we can measure from children's voices themselves how they are able to work together, live together, learn together and thrive. So in a simple sense, we will aggregate that data and we'll be able to identify who has participated and allowed us to reassure ourselves, and by default, who has not participated and not enabled us to reassure ourselves. So that's the simple answer to that. We have a responsibility to carry out and to support self-assessment audits across the Safeguarding Partnership and the relevant organisations. We will be releasing a survey, young people have told us. We have written to Ofsted and said that when they go into schools, they should be checking that the DFE guidelines, where we've made further recommendations, are being adhered to, and that should be part of the safeguarding focus. And we are in communication with them at this moment in time about that. But simply put, we're going to continue to check. And we will then report to scrutiny in Hackney Council, and Hackney Council and the Learning Trust, I am confident, will work together with us to make sure that those schools who don't participate are able to gain reassurance in whatever way possible so that we can align it uniformly. So we will be checking, we will be reporting back, and there will be a mechanism if we are not satisfied for us to take action. And we will. I mean, there's no point in us making a recommendation, no point in us carrying out self-assessment audits if we just say, oh, well, we can't do anything. There's plenty we can do by way of highlighting non-compliance. And actually, there are other tools in our toolbox that if we need to default to them, we will. Okay, Paul.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. I'm going to move on to the next question. I'm just mindful we have a lot of questions to get through. So the next question is, what is the difference in influence that Hackney have over academies, free schools and normal secondary schools? What does this mean for our kids or parents?
Okay, in terms of the way the education system works, in terms of oversight and accountability, academies are accountable to the ESFA, which is the Education and Skills Funding Agency, so directly to the ESFA and the regional schools director. Maintained schools are accountable to the local authorities, their local authority maintained schools. So the local authority has more jurisdiction, you could say, with maintained schools. But then when it comes to academies, it doesn't mean that we don't work with these academies. We influence, we challenge, we support our academies. And to be fair, our local academies really do engage very effectively with the local authority. They come to all the local authority meetings, they support our systems and processes, whether it be strategically or challenge. So there is not one local school, not one academy, not one free school, not one maintained school who is not engaging effectively with the local authority in this space. And in fact, we have academy members who are a member of local committees and local working groups. So I have to look at, as a director of education, the entire education system, whether that be the local faith schools where we engage locally with the Roman Catholic diocese, or faith schools where we engage with the local Anglican diocese, free schools where we engage directly with the free schools, or the maintained academies. We have 81 schools, we have a number of colleges, we have children's centres, we have our parts of the system in the Haredi community as well. The education system locally is an ecosystem, as I call it, made up of so many different parts. And it's incumbent on all partners to actually work with all parts of the system. But in terms of what influence we have, I would say every school, regardless of it, I'd rather not be maintained on statutory powers as a director. I'd rather not be required on that to actually get the outcomes we want. We want influence. So every one of our schools locally is engaging with our systems. Some of our schools, yes, there are exclusions in those schools. Therefore, we have to go through a process. But each and every one of our schools, where they've done exclusions, have been transparent, they've been fair, they've opened themselves up to say, we're happy for you to come in and review our processes, which my officers do so to ensure that these exclusions can stand up to the highest level of scrutiny as well. So 30 exclusions, 30 system failures, which we could have done and should have done something differently. 50% of those exclusions being of black children is 50% too many, absolutely. But a simple answer to the simple question is very much the jurisdiction I have jurisdiction directly over maintained schools. If it's an academy, therefore it's more about influence, but the worst case scenario, we can use statutory powers. As Jim has already said, the Safeguarding Children's Partnership, Section 11, duty to collaborate. There are a number of range of powers available at our disposal, Jocelyn.
Thank you for responding to that. I would think the reason why that question has been asked is because through my experience of working with young people and parents, is sort of the breakdown in communication, particularly with parents, young people and academies specifically. So yeah, I reckon that's why that question has come up, to really understand sort of the powers that the council has within academies. So the next question is, what sanctions will be placed on schools who do not adhere to the council's strategy regarding anti-racist practice?
What sanctions? Now, sanctions is quite a hard word. I think in terms of, as a local authority, our role is to work with all of our schools and settings right across the system, so not just schools, but obviously our post-16 providers and our children's centres and our nurseries. We look at all parts of the system. Our role is to influence, persuade and negotiate with all of our providers who pretty much in the main do engage with our systems and processes. And in fact, I'm not aware of any school as an outlier. I mean, Jim mentioned earlier the process that's been put in trade by the City and Hackney Safeguarding Children's Partnership, which will pretty much have a high level of response. But if there are schools that are not engaging, if there is a part of the system that's not engaging, then we will obviously have to have a targeted approach, which would begin with some form of escalation as well. So we would utilise our powers proportionately in response to where we felt there was a gap. But ultimately, it would be about deploying influence initially to have a dialogue, to understand what the barrier is between that school or setting not being able to engage effectively, and then obviously a need of escalation if need be. But I'd rather say that we've seen good responses so far. when we do our Section 175 safeguarding audit on an annual basis with our schools, we get 100% responses. So I'd like to say the engagement, the contribution, the response from all of our schools and settings across the system is pretty good. Yes, we will have pressures in the system, and sometimes there may be issues around not engaging in a timely manner, but if there is a need for escalation, then we're not averse to using our powers available at our disposal.
Thank you for your response. The next question is, how much can school boards do towards getting schools to have more consistency with behaviour policy? How far is the UNCRC at the centre of the heart of school behaviour management?
So could you just repeat that question, Jocelyn?
Yes. How much can the school board do towards getting schools to have more consistency with behaviour policy? How far is the UNCRC at the centre of the heart of school behaviour management?
Okay, so the role of the Hackney Schools Group Board as set out is an independent board that's been set up with a view to being arm's length deliberately from the council to provide that critical friend, challenge and support. Yes, it does have input from local head teachers as well as the wider board membership, but very much providing that check, that challenge, that support, that alternative perspective. The role of the Hackney Schools Group Board is an important critical friend to look at what the Hackney education and the local system could be doing differently. So it is one of advisory, Jocelyn, as opposed to telling and mandating, because it doesn't have those powers, but it's an advisory board, so it does have potential to influence. And I have monthly meetings with the chair of that board, Marissa, where we sit down and I get an understanding of what's coming out of the board, and also I attend the board meetings where I can as well, to make sure we do get that connectivity. So there is influence, I've mentioned earlier, Deborah Robinson, our inclusion systems leader, has been working closely with Marissa and visiting local schools to capture the voice of our young people, their experience of the system as well. So there's something there that directly they've influenced, and that came about through listening, and that came about through influencing. So a simple answer is very much that the role of the Hackney Schools Group Board has already influenced, and we're already beginning to see impact as a result of it. In terms of the UNURC, apologies, acronyms, what's UNURC?
I don't know either.
The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. I was going to address that, but
Yes,
go
I was
ahead,
going to say your hands was up, Jim, so if you go for it.
Paul, do you want me to go ahead? I mean, the UNCRC, the UNCRC should inform everything that is fundamentally focused on human rights. And the CRC, with regards to the rights of the child, has 4 core elements that I believe are relevant to schools and should be fundamentally focused upon by governing bodies: commitment to non-discrimination, commitment to devotion to the best interests of the child, supporting the right to life and development, and respect for the views of the child. Those things all align with our active anti-racism approach, with the approach that we would expect around any safeguarding policy and any governance regime that is looking after the framework within which children are educated. So it's a really excellent question. It's one that I'm going to take away with me, because I'm working on the basis that those things are all there within the safeguarding policies, are all there within the other range of policies and procedures that ensure that children are safe in school, that their views are respected. But equally, I think it's such a good question that it's a good template for us to take away and look at and just read across. But it's universally applied, and I can't think of a policy that would be developed with children that wouldn't be grounded in the foundation of UNCRC.
Thank you for that.
I'm just going to follow on from that, Justin, if that's okay. Yeah, so acronyms, that one called me out, but we're aware of that, and obviously as we have an ambition through the work of our evolving Hackney 2030 education strategy, which has seen input from local partners, stakeholders and providers with a focus on the United Nations Voice of the Child in terms of the child-friendly town ambitions, and actually how that actually underpins our Hackney 2030 ambition strategic priorities, particularly with a focus on inclusion, particularly with a focus on making sure that Hackney, every child matters and no Hackney child left behind. So absolutely, we're well aware of that, and that's actually underpinning the Hackney Education 2030 strategy strategic ambition. So that will be the golden thread, of which many of our school head teachers and our system leaders across crime reduction, education, social care and health are already working towards in terms of shaping and designing that. And also our governing body members. We've recently put on a workshop at the Hackney Town Hall where we had input from chair of governors from all of the local schools. And again, looking at Hackney Education 2030, our future ambitions, our future aims, to making the Hackney education system be the best possible version of itself that it can be. And again, the very much United Nations Convention, the rights of the child, very much printed right across that. So that's very much what I would call one of our obsessions in terms of I must get rights in that. So we're very much aware of that. We're looking at that underpinning our future strategic ambitions as a local area, as a local area partnership as well.
Thank you very much for that. Our next question, what is being done to ensure the staff in our schools represent our local community?
I can speak a little bit about that and hand over to Paul. I think one of the things that before Paul started, I was keen to have a network for school leaders that were from Black and low majority background, and the feedback from the then director of education was that there's no appetite for that. I've since discussed that with Paul, and I know that Paul's been keen to facilitate and look at a network and how and what that might look at. And that's for two things. It's to make sure that support are there for existing Black leaders, but equally to work with them to think about how we increase that visibility and identify the barriers and no barriers. Ultimately, a governing body will decide on who the head teacher is, and I'm happy for Paul to correct me if I'm wrong on that. But as a local authority, we're thinking of how we influence, facilitate and support schools in that broader diversity, and the network is just maybe one small part of that. But all of the work that we're doing on inclusive leadership as a local authority, all of the support that we offer around human resources is there, and all of that is accessible to school. Deborah Robinson, that's online. There's a lot of work with schools and training on making sure that schools have cultural competency and about inclusion, but also about diversity within the workplace. So there are things that we're doing as a local authority in terms of what we can influence. Paul, I don't know if there's anything more that you want to add.
Well, thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. Look, the success of the Hackney education system is nationally and internationally recognised. 97% of local schools are good or outstanding. The outcomes for our children, young people attending Hackney schools are outstanding. Aren't they with the best percentile or top upper performing quartile nationally in all categories? The outcomes for children, young people with STEM attending Hackney schools, and again, puts us in the upper performing quartile nationally. 100% of local Hackney children's centres and nurseries are good or outstanding. Where I'm going with this is there is a significant number of Black and global majority leaders of those provisions actually leading Hackney's provision. What we're seeing is an increase in terms of by comparison with other local areas. I'm not going to break it down for you the numbers, but what I will say is there is a fair amount of leaders coming from Black local majority groups. And in terms of there are various methodologies in place and processes in place to develop and grow and provide pathways and opportunities for more and more people from the local community, and the amount of local Hackney people who are actually Hackney proud, who have grown up in Hackney, raised in Hackney, went to the Hackney education system, are passionate about the Hackney education system. Councillor Bramble frequently reminds me of where Hackney schools were 20 years ago in the lower performing area nationally, amongst the worst performing local areas nationally. And now here we are, we sit up the top of the tree, But that's underpinned by many black global majority leaders in our schools and settings, not just in positions of leadership, but middle management and in the classroom as well. So yes, there's more room to go, we know that, there's more to be done, and it's something we will never stop at. But what we're seeing that evolution, where when I chair those head teacher meetings, primary sector, or when I chair those secondary head teacher meetings, or when I chair all those meetings with all the heads coming together, I'm seeing more and more black and global majority leaders. I visited an outstanding children's centre last week with a black and global majority leader leading that division, with a leadership team that's reflective of the local community. So I am seeing this happen more and more. I've only been in place a year, but as a black leader of the local education system, underpinned by the support of many system leaders of all races, black, global majority, white, regardless, Hackney is incredibly inclusive in our recruitment and our retention. It's about getting the right talent, the best talent for our children and young people. And if they happen to be black and global majority, then that's a bonus, but there's a strong affiliation to Hackney. So we're working closely, we're trying to develop the best talent to find their way to the top.
Thank you very much.
Can I just quickly come in on that, please, Jocelyn? I'd like to say that when we were auditing all of the schools in the aftermath of the Child Queue update, we were collecting evidence. We saw some really strong evidence of a number of schools pivoting to rebalance the workforce and to engage where they could, and some really early success in what was being done, for example, around classroom assistants and the speed with which they were able to change the complexion within the classroom. And I wouldn't underestimate the value of that at that level as a strong beginning. And you know, of the schools that we audited during this period of time, that was a really strong theme, that they recognized it and there were steps being made, and I certainly have seen evidence of it. So I just leave it at that.
Thank you, Jim. Can I just? Yeah, I just want to say to all the panel members, sorry, Antoinette, can we keep our responses quite precise, because we've still got quite a few to get through. Thank you.
Okay. I was very quickly, to build on Paul's point, yes, it's about having the right person, but there are good black leaders, and black people can be at senior level. We've got to, we need to find them. So it isn't just about saying, well, we have to get the right people. That is true, but what can we do to find those black leaders? Because they are out there, and that's the task that I think we've got to focus on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next question is, can we get some acknowledgement leading to the change that schools have far too much power that undermines parents' authority, forcing children to be overly compliant and use less critical thinking skills?
The national curriculum that our schools implement is nationally led. Our schools have to work within a national framework that's devised by government and is regulated heavily by the Department for Education and Ofsted. So our schools are held to account how effectively they implement that national framework. So I think our schools, the outcomes for our children and young people in our schools are outstanding, as I referred to earlier. The performance of our schools, as I referred to earlier, is outstanding, but the national curriculum is quite restricted and very prescriptive in terms of set aside or set upon from national government. So my local head teachers, to support their schools, their staff and settings, have to implement the national framework as effectively as possible locally.
Thank you. Deborah?
Just on the curriculum, we have a system leader for the diverse curriculum, Hackney Diverse Curriculum, which is moving into its second phase. Our system leader for the diverse curriculum starts in September. And actually, one of the things that an anti-racist curriculum does is actually challenge thinking and ensures that students are, or young people are, well averse to you know, the wider aspects of society, and allows what the curriculum allows Black children to do is actually see themselves. within the curriculum. So one of the key things that our system leader will be looking at is whether there is that implementation of a racially diverse curriculum and what it looks like from key stage 3 to right up to 5. And more importantly, if they are not using that, then what are they using to ensure that children are aware of their place within society and the Black contribution to society. So I think whilst we appreciate how restricted the curriculum is, and especially at Key Stage 4, there is also opportunity, ample opportunity, lower down Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, to ensure that we have a curriculum whereby children who look like me can see themselves within the curriculum and see what we have brought, and not just be seen through oppressive lenses. So that's something we're definitely working towards.
Chair, just to build on that, that curriculum is linked to national curriculum, so teachers don't have to think about how they have to fit something extra into the curriculum. And the reason why I started that diverse curriculum was exactly what Deborah said. Racism was something, slavery was something awful that happened to Black people. I want children that look like me and don't look like me to understand what Black people have contributed to the country and see themselves through those positive contributions, through the lens of a contributor. So that was my driving force for establishing that. I want to thank Deborah, Pauline and all others that helped me start that work here in Hackney. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, building on from that question, someone else has asked, is the behaviour standard dictated by the national curriculum?
Is the behaviour standard dictated to by the national curriculum? Behaviour standards will vary from school to school. Schools will have in place their own behaviour policies and will implement their behaviour policies as consistently and as effectively as possible in response to whatever the context is. National context. National curriculum determines what is played out in the classroom, what our children and young people access in terms of teaching and learning. And but schools' behaviour policies will be responsive, we would hope, proportionate according to local needs as well, to ensure that standards are maintained in our schools, that our schools and settings can provide environments that are safe, that are secure, and conducive to high quality teaching and learning to take place.
Another question was, if parents feel like they're struggling with academies not being heard, or having complications, challenging stuff, who do they go to? Where is the support?
Okay, what we've seen is parents do have a route to go direct to the Department for Education or Ofsted, and from my most recent meeting with Ofsted last week, in fact, they were telling me that they are seeing an increase in complaints nationally, not locally, nationally, where more and more parents are actually going down that route, where they feel that there are concerns. So there is ultimately the starting point. We would always say, if a parent has disquiet with regards to the school, is to use the school's complaints procedure. All schools have to have a complaint process in place, and parents have to exhaust that. But some parents, having exhausted that, will then have the opportunity to go direct to Ofsted. And if it's a safeguarding matter, then naturally we have our safeguarding powers as a local authority to intervene and progress those as well. And have a safeguarding education team who will look into that. So if it's a safeguarding matter, then it's non-negotiable. We will move very, very quickly on that in terms of direct intervention and action. If it's a general complaint about school standards, systems, processes, whatever's going on in the school, then they would have to go through the school's complaints procedure. If they've exhausted that, then it would be about writing to the regulator to express those concerns, who invariably will then notify my office, and we will then have to look into it. But we need a mandate from them to do so. But anything pertaining to safeguard, then we move very, very quickly, because obviously safeguarding is a non-negotiable red line that we have to move on.
Thank you very much. We've just got enough time for maybe another 1 or 2 questions. The next question is, how are schools engaging with Hackney Education to reduce exclusions? Give an example of what a plan to reduce exclusions look like.
Thank you, Justin. We have a local area reducing exclusion strategy, and we have a reducing exclusions operational group and a board as well. Both of those groups had input from local area head teachers and partners from local organisations across health and care, as well as the voluntary sector. Deputy Mayor Brown mentioned earlier that convened an exclusion summit recently, again, which had input right across the system. So we look at that integrated systems approach to really not just look at exclusions as a number, but look at exclusions as a failure of the system, as I've mentioned earlier, Jocelyn, and how we look at ways to prevent and avoid exclusions as well. So schools are really engaged in our systems and processes, and when a school does unfortunately have to go down the route of exclusions, I have an exclusions coordinator with the local authority who will make sure that my officers are then aware of that. And then we use the school improvement system. We have an outstanding school improvement service led by Jason Morant, my Assistant Director of School Improvement and Performance, and his team will actually provide challenge and provide support and work with schools. And sometimes, Justin, permanent exclusions are overturned, or we find a different way, because we're child-centred and we focus about what's the best possible pathway for meeting the needs of the child in this given situation as well. And the recent exclusion guidance that's come out, that's going to be in place from September 2023, that's come out from the Department for Education, where we're looking at, again, how we can implement that most effectively. Our schools will already be engaged as part of that process. So I'm not seeing opposition to engaging with the local authority. So when I convene an event in the town hall with a focus on the Hackney 21st strategy, which prevention of exclusions is one of the strategic things, we had nearly 100 people in the building, high attendance from schools. So schools really do engage very effectively. We have too many exclusions, we know that. And our head teachers know that, and our head teachers really want to work together with local authority partners to really drive this down. I've not met one head teacher yet who ever wanted to be in a position where they had to consider excluding the child. My head teachers come to me and say we have to do something different. So schools are really well engaged, and if they're not, well, that's not, I can't even say that, because they all are really engaged, each and every one of my local schools.
Thank you, Paul. We've only got another 2 questions, time's really ticking, but one of the questions are internal exclusions still counted as exclusions?
Yeah, that's a good question. Our internal, the permanent exclusions are the ones that become official exclusions. And when we say internal, in terms of it unofficial, if we become aware of an internal or an unofficial exclusion, then my officers will follow up on that and challenge the school. But during my time in post, I've not been made aware of any single, not one, unofficial exclusion. With regards to internal exclusions, if schools are using it as a mechanism to engage the family or engage the child to prevent it, and again, if we're aware of it, then this is something that we can actually do something about, but I'm not aware of any internal exclusions at this junction.
It's a good question, though, because fixed term exclusions and permanent exclusions can be 2 different things, and one facilitates a pathway to the other. And as I say, on the child C case, young Tishon Aird, the 15-year-old victim who was stabbed, there were a series of fixed term exclusions in the opinion of the parents, and there's some weight in this, for what were quite minor issues in the lead up to what became a permanent exclusion. So that's something I'll take away and talk to Paul about, just to make sure that we're capturing all of that and understanding the indicators, because the truth is, whether we like it or not, we're not going to deal with exclusions overnight. The issue around exclusions and disproportionality are born out of a variety of issues to do with poverty, overrepresentation, underrepresentation, and all of the issues that have been highlighted across the board that lead young people to be open to adverse influence, to coercive control, and affect their behaviours. So there is a significant piece of work, and I think that falls into that area of work that the council is going to look at through that recommendation across the board, because we've got to be working today to prevent the exclusions in the next 5, 10 and 15 years when we really can make a difference.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Point, because when we talk about
Sorry, Paul, I just want to...
I have a great response to you as well, Justin.
Thank you. Thank you. We just got a lot of questions. So quick question I need you to kind of sum up is, following on from Child Q, what is happening with police in schools? You've got like 2 minutes to answer that.
Jocelyn, I mentioned earlier about the addendum that our local police, Safety Schools police team have led on, and it's a posh word for saying, look, we recognise that even though the Metropolitan Police has a pan-London policy for the police schools, Hackney recognised that when we had to come up with a Hackney addendum. And on the back of that, so there's been a lot of listening with young people, with parents. We've had several recent listening events with parents, with secondary schools where the police have come out, and I facilitated those sessions where those parents were cited on the addendum, and what that meant locally to changes to the local policing model as well. So we have police officers working with all of our schools, of which the approach will probably differ to all of the schools, depending on the school's need as well. So that flexibility from the police is incredibly welcome. Jim mentioned about James Clyden, who Borough Commander has been on the front foot in terms of engagement. James has come out to meet head teachers with me recently. I mean, we're seeing a real positive energy and a real positive commitment to partnership working and engagement. But the simple answer is very much, we've got a Hackney addendum. We're changing it in response to local needs as well. So there is a case of, and a number of parents have already been to those sessions, so they'll already be cited on what that addendum means locally, but we can make sure that's shared with parents if there is if there's a request for information, but it has been shared on a wider level already. Happy to share it.
Thank you very much. We have so many questions that have been coming through. I want to thank everybody for all their questions. All the questions will be answered still via email, which will be sent out along with the recording for those who would like to have it. I do think it's also really important to maybe how we can follow on from these conversations, not just, you know, now we've had the update, but this seems to be a good forum for parents to be able to put their questions across and for us to be able to have honest and open conversations. So I think moving forward, this may be something that we can look at as a platform to carry on. Paul, can I ask you to quickly give us some updates because we're going to time out in a few minutes.
Very much. And let me begin by saying thank you to each and every parent, carer, officer, partner who has attended tonight's session. This is an important conversation. When I joined Hackney last autumn term, I was made acutely aware how important this was as a topic, as an issue, how it really was. The world turned upside down on the back of the child abuse situation. And working with Jim and the City and Hackney Safeguarding Children's Partnership, working with the police, working with their teachers, we've recognised significant change and progress in this space, but we know there's a long way to go. So in terms of, just to sum up some of what's going to be coming next, we mentioned in this meeting the work of the recent exclusion summit, so looking at disproportionality, looking at exclusions. There'll be a follow-up working group, there'll be further events on the back of that, where we'll be able to look at what's working, what's not working, how we can drive that down further. Exclusions and disproportionality is on the local scrutiny committee forward plan for next year as well, to maintain oversight and challenging that. I've mentioned earlier the work of the Hackney 2030 education strategy, underpinned by the principles of the United Nations, rights to the child principle. So that's a programme of work that we'll be looking. We've already got governors involved, we've got head teachers, we've got the voice of the child being captured as part of that process. My parent engagement lead, Laura Stack, will be working on a mechanism in the autumn term to ensure that the voice of parents and carers are involved in shaping and designing that before we get a final version of that strategy in January next year. In terms of the programme of engagement, in terms of with governors, again, it's crucial because whilst we challenge and support our schools and settings to be the very best versions of themselves they can, I'll work with governors and chair governors as an important piece of that as well. We will continue to work closely with the City and Hackney Safeguarding Children's Partnership. So Hackney Education will work closely with Jim and his team to look at how we implement the recommendations in this report. So that's the big one. How we progress that. So looking at, otherwise this report, it just sits on top of the shelf gathering dust, no impact. We need to be in a position 12 months time to be able to look back and say, the report, this has been the impact, here's the signs of progress, signs of impact, signs of change. So we'll be working very closely with a view to implementing that for the new academic year. So there are a range of actions about next steps. Probably be worthwhile maybe convening one of these events in the future to be able to look at progress against some of that criteria, Jocelyn.
I would say though, any future update will be around anti-racism and practice work. It won't be based on Child Q. Child Q and her family need time to heal. I keep saying it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because of systemic racism across society, and that has to be the broader brush that we address some of these issues with. So any update will not be labelled child queue going forward.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Do you want to say anything else, Councillor, before I close?
I just want to thank you for just your advocacy in the community, ability to make yourself available. I know there's so many other things that could have taken up your time, and you've just made yourself available every time we reach out to you. I want to thank you. I also just want to tell everyone you recently got an award from the Prime Minister for the work that you do with young people. I just want to acknowledge that here in this space, and to reassure all of the parents and carers, if you've got a question there, we will get back to you and make sure there are detailed answers, but actually no waffling, just plain English. This is what your response is. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your ongoing support. Really appreciate it. I want to urge everybody to please read the report. Thank you very much, Jim, for the time and the effort and all the energy that you put into making sure that it was something that was, you know, really credible. Please watch the video, guys. It's really important. And thank you very much to the panelists and to all of you that have attended to make this session possible. I think it was very informative, and may we continue to move forward very strongly for Hackney. Good night. See you all.
Good night.